Hello and welcome on the Barricades. My name is Boyan Stanislavski. I am your host, and this is our first edition for 2023. Happy New Year to everyone. Thank you for being with us, and we promise some more great content this year. With me is our special guest and a friend of the show, Arto Artinian. Hello, Arto.
Hello, Boyan. Very happy to be here at the beginning of the new year.
Right, right. We're really happy to have you here too. So, just a very quick reminder for those who perhaps see you for the first time here on our show. Arto Artinian is a Bulgarian American academic of Armenian origin. He teaches mostly in the United States, but he spends a lot of his time in Bulgaria as well. He's an author of numerous articles, and he's also a researcher and a trained philosopher, which is why I actually invited you here today, because I want to speak a little bit about politics and philosophy, and I want to start. I want to start from a place that we both know pretty well, which is Bulgaria, our homeland. And we're old enough. Both of us are old enough to remember at least the the late phase of the previous system, that is the one before 1989, the People's Republic system, and the current one. And I'm thinking, it's a very good occasion, the beginning of the year 2023, to actually try and make some sort of summations, and to draw perspectives as to where are we going. Bulgaria is one of the countries which, like most or the entire Eastern Europe, really is are newcomers to, as the Russians like to refer to, the collective West. So we are there now in the collective West, and the question is, where do we find ourselves after those 30 years? And I want to start with Bulgaria, because Bulgaria is a pretty drastic example, and then we can try and extrapolate our analysis to other Eastern European countries and Western Europe. What is the state, institutional, ideological, emotional, even if you like, of the civilizational entity that we have attached ourselves to, and was it worth it? Because when you look at Bulgaria today, you see a country which is completely devastated institutionally. It just doesn't work. I mean, that's why I like to call it, I don't like doing this, but I use this phrase, failed state, because this is what failed state is for me. It's not necessarily that people are so poor that everybody's a beggar on the street and stuff like that. I mean, this you can get even in countries which are serious countries, like the United States, for example. There's a lot of homelessness, people under every bridge almost, right? But then in Bulgaria, perhaps, the question of poverty is very obvious, but maybe not as spectacularly visible as in the West or in the United States. Nonetheless, it's a country which doesn't function, where the institutions don't work. And just again, a reminder here, uh, the statehood, the measurement of the quality of statehood, makes only sense if you break it through the activities of the institutions, respective institutions for respective for different countries, because this is what states are for, to be governed by institutions, not by individual people. This is how they are organized, around institutions which are supposed to be able to be governed by various parties, various groups, and so on and so forth. So this is one thing: the institutions don't work. Second, on the political front, we have no politics, really, no real politics. We don't even have parties, quite honestly. We have some groups, some cliques, who which don't represent anyone, let alone any concrete specific class or social group. Even they are just random representation of some corporate mafia interest here and there. It's very shady and crony. We don't really get the full picture. We never really get the full picture of it. And they are, of course, a sort of function, if you like, of what is happening around the world, especially the current Bulgarian government, which has only been put in place, for all I can, based on what we can see on the surface happening. It was only formed, and it was formed born in huge pains, only to push Bulgaria over the brink and to make it join the war efforts on the part of Ukraine and the collective West, right? So and then when you come to think of the surrounding, like geographical even surrounding of Bulgaria, there's a conflict which is brewing up again between Kosovo and Serbia, which uh, if it manifests itself at one point as a hot war where people are shooting each other and stuff like that, I wonder if the current if Bulgaria in its current state can actually survive yet another war on its border. I wonder if it's not just going to implode. And I realize it's a bit of a drastic picture. I realize it's a bit pessimistic. I know it's the beginning of the year, but let's face it. I mean, this is the situation in our countries, in the country of our origin, and then let's try and see how things are further west. So what's your take regarding those things that I just floated here as talking points, starting reference points?
Yeah, I mean, Boyan, it's a great overview because you raise a lot of, I think, big questions that need to be discussed, probably constantly unless they get resolved. So I think my sense is that Bulgarian politics is a fairly accurate representation of what it was supposed to be when Bulgaria changed political course and joined the collective West or the European Union. And here I just want to open a footnote. Uh, the European Union is a very peculiar political entity itself, and I think that's the source of a lot of the problems that exist in Bulgarian politics as well, but also European politics. Is that what happened with the European Union as a political entity? It's a supranational entity. So the European Union exists as the European Parliament is above the national parliaments of the members of the European Union states. Um, and yes, there are representatives that are sent there from the various member countries, but in many ways, and people have made this argument since the beginning of the European Union was created as a way of subverting the national politics of its member states, right? Because it's sort of like a supranational confederation, which means a weak central government. The European government is very weak. It has no military. It has no foreign diplomacy, really. I mean, they're formally structures, but they're essentially ineffective. So, in many ways, the European Union is a very weak political entity, which, of course, then places all of the political power in the hands of the economic structures of the European continent. So, in other words, the European Union is an interesting animal where the political is subservient to the economic structures. And the capitalists, the wealth owning Europeans who play a dominant economic role in society have, of course, overwhelming influence in the political system. Now, that's pretty much likely the case for since the end of the French Revolution, but you may argue in Europe. But it is very striking with the European Union is that you have a politics which has become locked, if you will, in a non-free form. If we understand politics, even the language of parliamentary democracy, to mean politics is the highest expression of decision making that affects the society as a whole. If we're talking about a particular society like Bulgaria or European Union as a whole, so politics has been locked into a non-free form, and the economic structures have been given a free rein. And I think that's precisely the point of the European Union to begin with, is to reduce or eliminate
Right, Arto.
political
Let me
structures.
just
Yeah.
interrupt you for a short while because I want to welcome Maria. Maria
Ah,
is here with us, the other co-host of the show. She wasn't able to make it
Hi, can
exactly.
you hear me?
Yes, we
yes.
can hear you. We can hear you, and we're recording. So, Maria, hello, and happy New Year to you too.
Hi.
And right, Arto, please keep going
Yeah.
on.
So I think the European Union itself is kind of a sick political entity. It doesn't really function very well. Even according to the language of parliamentary democracy, it's not a democratic. It's not a structure that responds to democratic impulses, the impulses from uh, the non-political class, for example, or the non-capitalist class, the non-business wealth-owning class. So I think Bulgaria, in many ways, is a product. The current Bulgarian political system is a product of this European Union-wide political system, of course, with several differences. And one difference, I think, is um, maybe people don't realize this, especially who are outside of Bulgaria in the global context, but Bulgaria experienced, along some other Eastern European countries, a profound catastrophe equivalent to losing a major war.
Right.
Bulgaria has faced a profound demographic destruction. I mean, the latest census, I believe, listed the population of Bulgaria at 6.5 million or 6.4 million
And we're talking official data. Official
official data,
data,
and that
right?
includes
So,
people who were counted when they were in Bulgaria, but they live outside of Bulgaria. But Bulgaria in 1989 was about 8,990,000 something people. So within 20 years, 25 years, let's say 30 years, you have 30% loss of the population without a war.
Right, right.
So when
Without
we
a
talk
single, yeah, without a single bullet being shot. That's
without a single bullet. So what does this mean? This means reduced social capacity for everything because the available pool of people is simply not there. It's much less. So one of the practical effects, for example, is that during the previous period, before 1989, Bulgaria had this nuclear power plant in Kozloduy by the Danube River, which was big. It
yeah, yeah.
had
It's still
multiple
there, but
reactors.
it's very reduced in terms
It's
of
very reduced, and
energy output, right?
yeah, and one of the reasons the Bulgarian electrical grid can actually function with vastly reduced electrical production capabilities or generating capabilities is because there's virtually no heavy industrial activity in Bulgaria.
Hmm.
All of that has disappeared. A lot of the workers, not just uh, cultural workers like musicians, artists, filmmakers, or engineers, white collar workers, as they say, but all kinds of workers left Bulgaria and are leaving Bulgaria or are leaving and coming back and forth, kind of like me. Or I spend my time here, but I work nominally for a non-Bulgarian university. Uh, this is a major demographic and thus political crisis, right? So the rapid loss of millions of people produces horrific side effects, intellectual, labor related, etc. So I think that's the first problem. The second problem is Bulgaria's legal system and political system itself closely mirrors the European Union's structures. All of the ideas of public-private partnerships, the state budgets cannot take on large deficits, even though we know from history, since at least John Maynard Keynes, the famous British economist who wrote about deficit spending as one of the best ways to resolve the capitalist uh, society's constant economic crises every 10 years. Well, the Bulgarian government is not permitted to take on large deficits, unlike the US government, for example, or unlike other large governments that can, who are not subjected to this kind of a restriction. So I think built into the inefficiency, as you say, and dysfunctionality of Bulgarian political institutions is the fact that they're functioning along European Union guidelines, even if arguably they don't function according to the way they're not supposed to. I'm saying that it is in the soul of the European Union's institutions to create ungovernability that's political, and thus the governability and political power is in the hands of the private
Hmm.
economic capitalist interests. Um, there's a very great book written about this, if I can find it. It's by a great Bulgarian writer. It's called Control, anyways, by the writer Raina Markova. And I really hope that book gets translated because it's a dissection of Bulgarian political institutions
Hmm.
as an example of European Union derived institutions, and thus their internal logic is chaos, is controlled dysfunctionality of the political institutions, thus delegitimizing in the eyes of the people. People think that politics is a dirty game and politicians are crooks because, of course, that's the actual effect. And thus politics is delegitimized, and the people who are supposed to be the center of society are the so-called entrepreneurs, the Elon Musks and their Eastern European or
Wannabe
Bulgarian
Elon
equivalents.
Masks in the case
The
of
wannabe
Bulgaria and
Elon.
Poland. Right.
Exactly.
So just to remind everyone and to put Maria in picture, we're discussing our New Year's topic here is the question of where do we stand as Bulgaria, as Eastern Bulgaria only as our starting reference point, but where do we stand as Eastern Europe in this big civilizational, if you like, entity, which the Russians refer to as the collective West. What is the state of that identity? Of that, well, yeah, of that identity too, but of that entity and of that project. And whereas with all the information, with all the happenings of the previous year, with everything, with the war in place in Ukraine, with all the crises, I wonder, whether it was worth it. After 30 years later, we find ourselves as the newcomers to the collective West, And you might argue that certain countries like Poland, for example, or the Czech Republic have gained something from. I don't necessarily agree with this perspective, but you could argue that they have gained something from attaching themselves to the collective West. But Bulgaria or Romania, maybe for that matter as well, you can speak about that, perhaps, Maria, are seem to be the obvious losers, and they're not the only one. And there are some countries like, I don't know, let's say Hungary, which seem to want to put a break on where we're going. Whereas in Bulgaria, we just had like this festival of elections, some time ago, like last 2 years, basically, elections after elections after elections, and one of the parties that actually took power for a while and was very popular was called We Continue the Change. So while some countries are actually want to put a halt to the change that's been occurring there for the last 30 years, in Bulgaria we get entities which are clearly supported from factors from abroad, which want to continue the change, press forward, and enthusiastically go for things which have brought about the complete and utter plight of the Bulgarian statehood, and we're really facing the end. I mean, not the immediate end, but we can see it already looming somewhere on the horizon. So, before Maria, before I ask your opinion on that, I still would like to Arto to please continue. How do you see Bulgaria vis-a-vis the West today? I mean, is this a kind of a chain, or maybe is this a relation which is based on the exploitation of the East by the West and of the newcomers to the European Union, to the collective West, by the old founding members of it? Is this, in other words, the kind of 1815 Mitteleuropa plan, Germany's plan to have one major economy in the center of Europe, which was going to be Germany, and then peripheral, supplementary, small economies all around, which would be unable to survive on their own and would only make sense if they provide for the central economy. And of course, today it's even difficult, it's even strange to ask that question in this form or with this analogy in mind, because what Germany is doing right now is like it's trying to revert, the clock of history, and they want to go back before what they've always used to be, which is a country based on industry and developing industry, which basically pulled the whole history of Germany upwards and secured progress. So, right, what do you think about
Well,
that?
I think that first of all, I think the Germans are committing political and economic suicide with the latest war between Russia and Ukraine, which I consider to be a civil war. But we've talked about this
Yeah,
before.
yeah,
But I think the German economy is probably committing suicide because a lack of Russian energy. Affordable energy is certainly going to force large German multinational corporations to probably move to the United States or other places. But I think Germans, for some inexplicable reason, are committing economic and thus political suicide. But that's their problem, unfortunately for the people who are going to, suffer through that. But I think Bulgaria is in Europe, but it's not of Europe. I think that's the view that I feel the European Union bureaucrats, but also Western European states view Bulgarians as. I don't think, and of course, I've heard many examples of this through colleagues and friends who teach in European universities in Germany and in England and so forth. I definitely think that Bulgaria is seen as a peripheral kind of non-European or barely European kind of place of little developed humans.
yeah.
Um,
Look down at all the
yeah,
time,
they're
right?
constantly looked. It's basically a form of old 19th century, like you said, racism updated with more polite words. I mean, you can look at the European history, the history of the European Union or whatever in Brussels. There was recently a Bulgarian journalist went there, and he looked at the way Bulgaria is, because this museum
They have a
has
Museum of Europe or something like
Museum
that,
of
right?
Europe
Yeah,
has
yeah, yeah. I
sections
know.
for all the members of the European Union and their
Right.
background, and look at the Romanians, look at the Bulgarians. So how are the Bulgarians portrayed? He did a video. He showed Bulgaria is portrayed in gray, black and white photos from the socialist period, ugly kind of but concrete architecture, which is of course not ugly, but it's portrayed in this way and is described as kind of like tired, hungry people. There's like a Yugo, like a Zastava, like one of the cheap Yugoslav cars, which is not even Bulgaria, that's in the exhibit as a Bulgarian, like socialist era car.
Which, by the way,
So
is Fiat. By the way, it's
which is
based on
fiat.
fiat, right? Like
Yeah.
it's a Western car. Just I mean, it
So
was a Western car produced in Eastern Europe.
yeah, so I think Bulgaria is portrayed as a bunch of savages.
Yeah.
Which of course is ironic because if you want to think about it historically, I mean, Bulgarian statehood preceded, for example, German statehood by many centuries. I mean, if you want to talk about European presence,
Mhm.
in that sense. But this is nothing new. This was the plan of the Führer as well in the 1940s to create a European Union dominated by German industrial and racial might with peripheral colonial states. So I think Bulgaria, in my opinion, to answer your question, gains nothing from participating in the European Union as it stands today.
Mhm.
Bulgaria can only count towards persistent deindustrialization, demographic decline, and essentially
Right,
colonization.
right, but
Because, yeah,
Arto, could you briefly speak about, because you mentioned the economic suicide of Germany, and I think this is a great segue to speak about like the state of the civilizational political entity that we subscribe to, and we try to succumb to its culture and everything. We try to mimic them, every step of the way. But look what they're doing. I mean, what happened? Like
yeah.
Germany going this way, like going down this road, like deindustrialization. I mean, this sounds like some dark force has almost sounds like a dark force has taken over, a force against historical progress, because this is what they're doing. They're cutting the branch upon which the entire progress of modern Germany has been based on, which is the industry, right? So they really seem to be doing something very, very weird. And that's why, I'm asking this question: what is the state of affairs there? I mean, they seem to have gone crazy. Am I exaggerating here?
No, I think in my view there is a division in the capitalist class in Europe, in Germany as well, and some of the capitalists are clearly, whether they own industries or they own virtual industries like finance, investment banks, and hedge funds and whatever. I think the part of the German capitalist class probably is global in its orientation and thinks in terms of the global market, the global capital flows, and etc. And thus, its primary allegiance is to the global financial capitalist centers, which are London and New York. So it couldn't care less about what happens to Germany as a nation state, perhaps, uh, as long as they can maintain their accumulation of wealth through the means of global financial capital flows. And I think the other part of the capitalist class is probably is not probably but is the kind of industrial capital, or sort of capital that may not be industrial, because there might be industrial capitalists who are oriented globally, but perhaps a capitalist class that maintains some kind of a allegiance or fidelity to the idea of uh, some kind of a national division, political division, right? So,
Mhm.
in other words, yes, I'm a German industrialist, and I'm German simply because I was born here. I'm culturally German, and etc. So I care about my place of living and my place of cultural and political and economic socialization. So I'm going to do the best I can to development. But we should not forget that even from the time of Karl Marx, it was very clear for the students of capitalism that capitalism is global in nature,
Mhm.
because
Right.
local capitalist appetites are very quickly filled by the accumulation of wealth in a local national market, and capitalists always want to be able to accumulate wealth by being active globally, because then the
Right.
market is endless, because it can always be one area of the world is saturated by refrigerators or German cars. Well, then another part of the world market, there'll be a war or a revolution or some other development,
Which
and a new market will open up,
Yeah,
right?
which by the way is essential to the notion of imperialism, something that
Yeah.
we discussed last
It's
year.
so capitalism.
Which many of the on the left don't seem to understand, especially vis-a-vis the current war between Russia and Ukraine. So, Arto, please finish your thought, and I want to
Yeah.
direct the same question or same set of questions to
Mhm.
Maria.
Yeah, just to say that I think what's happening in Germany, instead of in a way, makes sense, because capitalist logic is globalizing in general, and liberalism, the political philosophy of capitalism, at least the dominant political philosophy of capitalism, is also global in nature. They're all imperialist
Mhm.
in the sense of the constant search for domination of economic markets worldwide. But in order to dominate economic markets, you also have to crush the political entities that already exist on those markets. So thus, capitalist logic is always and always has been and always will be globalizing, and thus because of that, imperialist in nature. So in that
Right.
sense, I'm not surprised by what's happening with
Well,
seemingly the suicide of
okay, I'm a bit surprised. I can tell you why later, but I want to hear Maria's take here because Maria, you live in Romania. You're part of the Romanian. I don't know how to say that. I don't want to say high society because you don't belong to any elite, but you belong to the layer of people who are well educated and who can afford to look critically on what's happening around them in Romania, outside Romania. You can you have all the necessarily knowledge, and I would say all the kind of instruments to analyze the situation. We've been talking about Romania and Bulgaria and Eastern Europe and Western Europe and world events many times on our previous programs, and I wonder what do your compatriots think about the current situation? Because what Arto said, I think, was very sophisticated in terms of its analysis, like why Germany is committing suicide, that there's no conspiracy behind it, it's just the logic of the market capitalist imperialist system, and so on and so forth, and that sometimes the matrix crushes a little bit, and it looks as if something extraordinary is happening, and on the surface it is, but process wise, it's pretty much the classical development and regression of capitalism. So I want to ask you, how do Romanians see the situation today? Because Romania and Bulgaria are a bit different in this respect, but Romania is very attached to its Western kind of Western affiliation. They really want to be part of the West. They constantly brag about how they are really, how they historically are there, and all the rest of it, even including historical mythology, like the Dacians or whatever, the first Romans, and all the rest of it, and then they see this European Union, which the leaders of which have obviously gone wacko. Like you look at Ursula von der Leyen, and she's just not in her right mind. You look at people like Franz Timmermans, they really seem to be mad, and with all their support, without one single critical word for the current Ukrainian authorities, which are in bed with certain guys that are representing ideology popular in the 30s in Germany and stuff like that. All those things, right? How is this perceived by Romanians? And is there
Well,
any pushback? Because in Bulgaria there is. I can talk about it later.
mhm. Yes, well, the first thing that I want to mention here is that unfortunately, the saddest part about this 30 years of neoliberal destruction was, and is related, I would say, to academia. Why?
Mm.
Because we no longer have what I call the cognitive antibodies to even perceive and analyze what is happening to us. And I will give you some examples. For instance, now we are so obsessed in Romania with this thing called scientometric, metrics, and doing all sorts of charts and see what university went better. And this is a way of putting, I don't know how to explain it. It's like a child who wants to get an A, not to learn. And this is where we're at right now. And why do I say that? And why did I start here? Because in order to answer a question like, how do Romanians perceive, or what do Romanians think about, you have to have sociological analysis and a body of knowledge that would allow you to base your analysis on some reliable data. But unfortunately, Romanian scientists are just selling some interesting themes to internationally indexed journals in order to advance in their careers. And unfortunately, we don't have enough data about us. Even the latest census that was conducted in Romania is a sham. There are millions of people who are lost in this census that was being done in order to see how many Romanians there are, how many Orthodox people and believers are in Romania. Basic facts about our society are not being counted and are not being expressed and analyzed into a meaningful body of research and coherent one. I'm not saying that everything is lost, but unfortunately, this, obsession with points, with getting points from publishing into a certain journal, of being international, this obsession of producing relevant research on an international level deprives us from,
Cosmopolitan, I would say, not so much
yes,
internationalist.
and it deprives us from very, very important, as I told you, it doesn't allow us to develop the cognitive antibodies. What do I mean by that? To develop an intellectual framework that would allow us to analyze what is happening to us. What is
Right.
happening to us? And I told you, let me give you another example. So I published, because there was a horrific murder in Romania. A teenager was murdered in horrific circumstances, and that opened up the debate of human trafficking in Romania, lack of public services,
Now Andrew Tate
transportation,
is
and
like
all the
another
rest. And
champion
I
in it.
published, this article. It is in a very, well-acclaimed academic journal, very prestigious one. So what? Because I was not allowed, since it was paid for and you had to pay for it to read it, I was not allowed to share it. And it was not a body of knowledge. It was me, doing well for myself or for the university, because like a fish, I lay the eggs in the lake of the university. I have these points and I put it there, and the university is doing fine and I'm doing fine, but the Romanian society is not being analyzed. So I'm afraid I can only tell you, and I can only speculate based on some research that was being conducted. And during the last year, we saw that the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, that aims to finance what they call the respectable left in Romania, and unfortunately, the Barricade is not
Doesn't
there.
belong there, I know, yeah, but
Doesn't belong there,
That's
for
okay.
instance, and they are obsessed, with playing this game of presenting the kind of left that is being accepted in the mainstream
Yeah,
intellectual
we want to talk about that in the next
and
segment of the program, by the way. Yeah.
they financed research showing that 70% of Romanians think that before 1989 things were better. So that should tell us something. And the second thing, because I have a lot of things to
Right.
say, unfortunately, since we were not able, to have a serious discussion, why do we want to join the European Union? It was just a hype, just an emotional attachment to some values and just some projections. It was all based on emotions, and on psychological projection, because a lot of Romanians thought that we were going to live like the top 10% of the French people. That was our ideal, and that we will be accepted and everything will work just fine, because our local elites are corrupt and are stupid and not educated. And now the European Union is gonna come and they are going to impose the rule of law and anti-corruption, and Romania is going to thrive economically, because all of the sudden we will get rid of the local corrupt elites, and now the pure European elites are going to come and solve the problem. That was the narrative, the media narrative, and that was, the dream. We had a dream related to the European Union that turned out to be a nightmare. And now, since we are seeing that it was in our face, and I explained that this time around, since we did everything they asked of us, we invested a lot in the security apparatus. Unlike Bulgaria, we have a very developed security apparatus with billions of euros being spent in this direction, in secret services, in police, army, and all the rest. So we have very, very developed security apparatus. And we did everything they asked of us in terms of the capacity of managing persons and asylum seekers, and investing in all sorts of technologies, for managing data and persons that are crossing the border. And now Austria said, no, we are not going to allow Romanians into the Schengen zone. And that was, when Romanians started to rebel. And we had an important, and I want to discuss even further about this, because I think that was, the trigger. A lot of the things that are related to the European Union, and Arto so wonderfully laid out, we were not given the chance to have this type of rational conversation about the European Union, and to criticize it from a point where you want to make it work, and you want to make it work for the people, not for the elites. We didn't have the chance of having that conversation. And when the frustration exploded because Austria denied our chance to join the Schengen space just a month ago, oh, we saw all sorts of right-wingers and all sorts of discourses, just exploding all over the place. And
Maria, please finish your thought, and I want to ask a question with regards to Schengen, because I think it fits perfectly into the kind of theme
And
that we're discussing.
unfortunately, since we as intellectuals, as we as the left, were not able to provide a rational criticism of the EU, the right-wingers monopolized the discourse. And we saw people protesting in gas stations owned by the Austrians, but they were right-wingers.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, the left, unfortunately, we have a privatized left in Romania. This
Yeah,
is
but
my
save that for the next
conclusion.
segment, please. Okay, about the left, because I want to speak about the next about the left in the next segment. I just want to focus now on the state of affairs within the
Mhm,
entities, or
mhm.
within that big entity that Russians refer to as the collective West, which we have subscribed to, and it's time to maybe make certain evaluations as to where things are going to go this year for us, for Eastern Europeans mostly. But I think that what you said about Schengen is very important here, because it's the kink is naked moment. That's what it is for the European Union, for Romania, for all of us to really wake up and see things as they are. And they are the following: Romanians are worse kind of people. Bulgarians are second class kind of people. The Polish are third class kind of people, right? They hate them. There is pure laboratory clean hatred from the West towards us, or if not hatred, then there is a lot of contempt,
Contempt
borderline
is
hatred. Okay,
the.
so
Mhm.
this is the thing. That's why it's not, you're not in the EU to join Schengen and to enjoy the freedoms and all those things that are for the West to enjoy. Your role there is to go and clean in their hotels, in their care homes, to change the diapers of their infants and elderly. That's the role designed for us and for you, like for the Romanians. But it's not necessarily that all the entire Romanian public opinion, or the Bulgarian, the Polish public opinion for that matter, that they understand all those nuances. But they see things. They see that they're getting attacked, or they're being mistreated in a very obvious manner, like in the case of Schengen. But let me give you another example from Poland, where now Poland is denied the money for the for the post-COVID reconstruction. Okay, but a large portion of this money is really loans, and Poland is obliged to pay back the loans, the HPs, the interest rates, but is not getting the money because allegedly, well, to a large extent, that's true. There is no rule of law here, but Poland is not much of an exception, really, in this respect. But that's a different story. But what I'm trying to say is that, the Polish are now trying, okay, in this convoluted manner to assert themselves. Like, politically, they use the leverage that America gives them. So they hug America even stronger. And with America in their arms, they want to, try and be strong against the European Union. I don't like this, but this is how you should also be able to read it, that they're trying to, assert themselves as a
Mhm,
political
mhm.
class, as some kind of, leadership of the nation. Same goes for Orban, by the way, whom I don't like because of his conservative politics and stuff like that. But he's at least trying to ra- to be rational about certain things. Okay, I mean, about for example, energy resources and the upcoming crisis and all the rest of it. And the same, in a certain way, is true for the Romanians. Like, please don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to praise here the right wing that is leading all those movements, but what I'm trying to say is we should be digging deeper below the kind of surface that someone is against or in favor of LGBT advocacy and stuff like that. We really don't have to break
Oh,
every.
I can't wait to explain what
Yeah, yeah,
happened
yeah,
with
yeah.
the
Okay,
European
okay.
Union,
I'm
the left,
finishing.
and all
Right,
these
right. I'm
things.
finishing. I'm finishing my question here. Is like, what I was trying to say. We don't have to break everything through the rainbow flag in order to figure out whether this is good or bad. And same goes for the Bulgarians, who are now so disillusioned so demoralized politically and in all kinds of ways, ethically, I would say, as well, that they the communication, the political communication that you can see in Bulgaria happening, the one that is interesting is actually against the European Union, regardless of whether it's spoken out by a right-wing or left-wing intellectual or opinion leader or whatever. The thing is that there's a growing discontent, and this discontent comes from the very simple fact that all those nations, and you mentioned that, Maria, and I think it's brilliant, that all those nations, when they were joining the West, when they were joining the European Union, okay, they were thinking of a different European Union. This European Union is not there anymore. The Polish are still, for example, that's a very good, I think, segue for further discussion, is that the Polish are in this schizophrenic situation. 80% of the Polish declare that they want to be in the European Union. This is absolute, non-starter for them to leave the European Union or something like that. Okay, but when you go and ask them concrete questions, do you want to use your diesel car in 4 years' time from now? Do you want to eat a lot of meat? Do you want to do this or that? Which, is increasingly contradictory to what the European Union is enforcing. It's like, they give you answers which exactly bring us to this conclusion. The European Union that they thought they were joining isn't there anymore. And I think some nations have
It
understood
was
it better.
never there. It
It
was
was
only
never
in our
there.
minds.
It was never there. Okay, and Maria, like before you give your answer, I just want to give Arto 5 minutes to reflect on that.
Specifically, what about the
Yeah,
whether
about the nations trying to, about certain nations and public opinions to, trying to assert themselves now in the face of the decline of the European Union and decline of the West, and also to link it to the question which I asked at the beginning of the program. So, okay, we've joined the collective West, and all those things have happened now, including the war in Ukraine. Was it worth it? Like, was it really worth it? Because it's a fair question to ask. You don't have to be a right-winger or against the European Union or whatever to ask it. Because, for when you draw the line, for Bulgaria, it doesn't seem very, optimistic, to say the least.
yeah, I mean, personally, obviously, I think that based on the evidence that we've seen so far, it's absolutely not worth it. It was never worth it, and it was a big mistake. And the European Union never was something that functioned very well at all. The only thing that functioned in Western Europe well was the Marshall Plan and the immediate side effects from it, which lasted through the 1970s and 80s. Now, the implosion of the Soviet system, that was the Soviet system's problem. One of the misconceptions is that, and this affects conversations in Bulgaria too, because there's still a very negative view of the socialist period in Bulgaria on the level of official ideology, precisely because I think there's some kind of a psychological reaction among the West that the socialist period really was a threat. Mm-hmm. That European socialism, as it existed in Eastern Europe, with all of its problems, and that doesn't mean anything. Any political system has problems and deviations, and uses authoritarian force against its enemies. Any political history contains those elements. That's a natural part of politics. The polemics, polemos, by the way, in the ancient Greek, means warfare, civil strife. So to engage in polemics means to engage in real disagreements on fundamental questions. So I think it's not worth it. It was never worth it. It was a complete tragic misunderstanding on part of us who believed, including me, on the European project, because we knew nothing about capitalism. We were completely in a bubble where capitalism was something like Star Wars or something that we saw on Hollywood movies. The reality, of course, is completely different for most people. And so I think the European Union is a failed project. It's horrible for for most people of Europe, except those who directly benefit from it in terms of their accumulation of wealth. It is definitely better for Western Europeans than it is for Eastern Europeans. So they're all different gradations, but in general, I think it's terrible political project for most Europeans. And the sooner it ends and it's reconstituted into some kind of a completely different, much more meaningful European political project that is based on different political principles, there's no point in saving it from my point of view. It's going down. It's a completely dysfunctional political system for most. And I think but you don't want to talk about what we should be striving to do now. That's the next segment, right? Because
yeah. And also, I want to give Maria a chance to reflect on those kind of conclusions I made based on what she said previously.
Yes, we
Maria.
have to make the European Union work on different, values and principle, and we have to reshape it completely because the way it stands, it is dysfunctional, and it functions very well for a small elite of people, financiers, very wealthy people, and is not functioning for the mass of Europeans. It's not functioning. And I don't know, for some people, maybe it was worth it, but not for the mass of people. And
Mhm.
when you look at it, I mean, the whole displacement of people, millions of Romanians leaving the country. We are a country of 20 million people, and we have 5 million people living abroad, and we effectively lost those people because they are not coming back, and their children are not even speaking Romanian anymore, and the situation is there, and we have to have a conversation, an honest conversation about what went wrong, because otherwise the right wingers are going to come and they use very easy to target scapegoats. The European Union doesn't work because it allowed the LGBT people to have rights. This is their narrative, or all sorts of crazy ideas that have nothing to do with reality. And I think it's very important, even what we're doing now. I mean, honest conversation about what went wrong and was it worth it or not. I don't know. I think I tend to agree with Arto that it was a
Mhm.
failed project. And if we are honest about that, when you draw the line, I think the disadvantages, topple the advantages that we had. And it was a dream, unfortunately. It was based on such high hopes, and unfortunately they didn't materialize into
But
something.
also the very poll that you mentioned, that 70% of Romanians, a poll from what I gather, sponsored somehow by the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, that 70%
Yes.
of Romanians claim that actually it was better, whatever it means, but better. That's their impression in general. Before 1989, than it is now, with this, Ceausescu regime in place, which was rather, difficult, much more difficult to bear with than, like, I don't know, in the case of Zhivkov or Jaruzelski or Gierek in Poland or stuff like that. So I'm thinking, this is also another moment of clarity for me, isn't it? Like, how do you discuss, and it's a question to both of you maybe for the end of this segment, how do you discuss with people who come forward and say, like, now everything is better, we have the right to vote, we vote for parties are being elected, they represent us, if things go wrong, then it means the wrong parties were chosen, that means which is a failure on the part of the public opinion, and so on and so forth. And it all ends, of course, where Maria explained many times, basically, by the way, on our program, that, we're a failed society. We are a failed society. We have no idea about politics. We have no idea how to organize our own state. We have no idea about anything. That's why we have to let the West come
Mhm,
and,
mhm.
organize and manage everything for us, which is a complete misunderstanding. Like, you don't have to have a PhD in politics in order to understand that this is just a nonsense on its face. And I wonder, how do you discuss when you come, when you come across people like that? And I'm sure there are many in your
Oh.
surrounding. So, Arto, do you have a concrete discourse strategy, if you like?
Well, I mean, if I'm talking to my friends, ordinary, normal people from the neighborhood that I've known for all my life, um, we talk about very concrete things, like, and we do the comparisons, like. So I think I always say this analogy with the body,
Mm,
like, if my left hand is working really well and it's got like well developed muscles and it's very pain free when I move it, but I have chronic headaches, I have diabetes, and I have cancer. I'm not going to say that I'm healthy. I mean, that would be nonsense, right? Because it's
right.
impossible to feel for the human body. It's impossible for the biological entity to be healthy unless it's healthy in a holistic way,
Mm,
right? So I think that literally the same thing applies to, I think we can apply to politics, is that those people who say that everything is better or most things are better because they can travel freely, or they can protest against those in power without the risk of immediately being arrested or whatnot, or thrown away from their school. You have to look at the whole social organism and how it functions as an organism, which means there are many sectors and sections of social life that need to be taken account for. Like, for example, look at the healthcare system. What happens in Bulgaria when the healthcare system is run as a business? It's a disaster in a quantifiable way. You look at the average expectancy of life, you look at the percentage of preventable diseases that are not prevented, you look at the people's reactions and their opinion of the medical field and doctors. All of these things are extremely negative, and the outcomes are horrible. You look at education, you look at literacy statistics, if you will, right? And then you continue. You look at pensions. You look at what happens with people who reach pension age and what is their quality of life and standard of life. And if you look at the cultural level, like I'll give you a specific example from my city in Plovdiv. Plovdiv was the European capital of culture, officially, and until 1989, early 90s, in the main street of Plovdiv, which is a pedestrian zone, which became a green zone long before that the concept of green existed from Western European green parties, because the socialist government created a pedestrian mall, a walkway in the center of the street by converting what was essentially a busy central street into a car-free zone, which dissects the center of the city in two parts. Anyways, within 1.5 kilometer range in the central city of Plovdiv, you had 5 movie theaters that all played different types of films: art cinema, blockbusters, Bulgarian cinema, only foreign cinema, etc. You have the Philharmonic, the opera, the theater, and you had the city art galleries, 2 of the big ones, and you also had the culture palace where people could go and study music or arts as amateurs. So there was an intense. I've spoken with a friend who's from Germany, from West Germany, who studied this period, and he said he was blown away when he experienced such intense cultural concentration that was available to everybody, not just intellectuals with PhDs or the fans of art, right? So on that field, there's also mass regression. Now, all of those theaters are gone. There's not a single one left in that region. The opera doesn't exist there. It's moved into the culture house, into the amateur space. The Philharmonic doesn't use the Philharmonic because it hasn't been repaired in 20 years and the roof is leaking, even though it has world-class acoustics. So instead, in place of those movie theaters, you have a burger, McDonald's, Hesse Burger.
It's very symbolic, by the way. Yeah.
Yes, and on the place of the most beautiful movie theater, this Art Deco building, which had beautiful seats and elegant kind of a space, is now FBet sports betting.
Wow.
So that is for me the best. That's all I say this all the time. This example. That's the metaphor.
Right. Okay, Maria, your take on what I said previously.
Well, it was a civilizational downgrade, and the fact that Romanians feel that it went better before tells it all. But unfortunately, in Romania, even during Ceausescu's time, I think one of the biggest failures of that regime was that it created, instead of solidarity, it created class division like no other regime, unfortunately. And the intellectuals felt entitled, and they felt different, and they felt superior, and they felt, that they have the right to tell the others what to think, and that, that undermines the Romanian society even today. The intellectual elites are blocked somewhere in the 80s. I mean, I told you, and the most vivid example I could give for this is the fact that the mayor of Bucharest wanted to build a statue of Ronald Reagan in Bucharest. And that tells you everything. I think not even Americans, they would feel embarrassed, with such a project. It is so provincial, so incredibly provincial and backwards that I'm feeling ashamed with our intellectual elites for the most time. And unfortunately, there is no turning back, because even if you raise a critical point of view, you are suspected of being a Putinist, of being a right-winger. And the fact to the matter is that I told one of my colleagues at the university, and I told her, you see, we were not there, and we were not there for the society. And we just took, our jobs, and we just did our jobs and we thought that this is it. We are going to go there, teach some stuff, write some articles, and get some money, and that was it. And I think our role was and still is to provide a platform for honest debates and honest criticism of the European Union. Boyan, if you take all the conferences that were organized in Romania about the European Union, I can guarantee there is not, I don't think there is 10% or 5% of the articles presented there that are critical with regards to the European Union. So what happens?
Yeah, okay.
You have crazy right-wingers saying that the European Union is Satan because it gave rights to the LGBT, and people buy it because they are frustrated and desperate.
Because there's no space for criticism, right? I mean,
And
like,
because
shut
there
people
is no
up.
space for honest criticism.
Right.
So with these people that are so afraid to speak out, that are so afraid in the academia to provide a platform for honest criticism like we are doing here, I mean, what can you tell them? What can you tell them?
Yeah, that was going to be my question. What can you tell them, and what do you go and tell them? But this is
Well, I
exactly.
tell them that you don't like what is happening now with the right wingers. Take a look in the mirror, take a look at yourselves, and ask yourselves, where were you when
Exactly.
you saw that something was not okay from the economic point of view, when you saw that there were so many things that needed to be debated and needed to be analyzed, and you were not there.
But also wrong from things going wrong in this social aspect, socio-cultural aspect, if you like, because this is a point that MS Shilagi made on a Hungarian lawyer and activist to an extent. When she was on our show and we asked her to comment on Orban and stuff like that, she said Orban is a major failure of the Hungarian intellectual class. You know, you can like Orban, dislike Orban, doesn't matter. The thing is that it was a major surprise for everyone that, oh, Orban is here and Orban is ruling, keeps being voted for and stuff like that. And, you know, all the sociologists with PhDs and professors, you know, gather around tables in TV studios, what I used to be the case when they still had opposition media in Hungary, would go there and like, what is this? This is a horrible, tragic incident. This Orban, you know, being at the top of the power structure in our country. And what kind of people have voted for him? And she goes like, guys, you're the sociologists. You don't know what kind of people vote in Hungary? Like, you don't know this? What have your studies been about? And this is precisely the case. I mean, it's just a festival of fakery. All those conferences about the European Union, about, you know, the PhDs, about like whatever historic socio-cultural development in this region or that region of your country. You know, this is just nothing. I mean, this adds nothing to the kind of mechanism that allows you to compute the failure of the system we're living in. On the contrary, it feeds you contradictory information, and then you end up like, you know, like the Polish wanting to be in the European Union, but wanting to be out of all the European Union's, you know, restrictions, measures, and so on and so forth. Okay, guys, we've spoken for like nearly an hour. I want to thank you for participating, and I want to thank our viewers and our listeners for your patience. And we have one more segment for you this week, and it's going to be very exciting. So stay with us, and please don't forget to check out our website, thebarricade.online, as well as to consider monthly subscription or a one-off donation that you can do via Patreon, via Substack, or via PayPal. All the links are in the description box. And once again, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to all of you out there.